She tried to humiliate me with divorce papers in front of a crowd, and everyone laughed, until the judge's wife revealed who I really was. She thought she had written the perfect ending for me, but she never expected the twist. Before I dive into the story, make sure you hit subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment if you enjoy hearing tales where betrayal flips on its head and the truth shocks everyone in the room. The gala was everything you'd imagine from the city's elite. Polished marble floors gleaming under chandeliers, the hum of conversations layered over the soft strings of a live quartet, waiters weaving between tables with silver trays of champagne. It wasn't just an event. It was a showcase of power, wealth, and status, the kind of night where reputations could be made or broken with a single gesture. I walked in by my wife's side, dressed in a tailored black suit that fit me like a glove, though I felt the weight of her cold indifference long before we stepped through those double doors. She was radiant, yes, draped in a crimson gown that caught the light with every step, her smile flashing at anyone who looked her way. But that smile hadn't been meant for me in a long time. We had been living a lie, and though I kept my silence, she thrived on parading her disdain. At home, she mocked my every decision. In public, she made sure others saw me as a man in her shadow. Still, I endured it not out of weakness but out of patience. I knew something she didn't, and that knowledge was the only thing keeping me calm while she sharpened her knives. That night, the air felt heavier than usual, like a storm was gathering just beyond the glittering chandeliers. I noticed how she clutched her purse tighter, her movements rehearsed, her smile too wide. She was planning something. The tables were covered in white linen, the glasses sparkling like jewels, and everywhere I looked, eyes followed us. Some were curious, others judgmental. I could almost hear the whispers. There they are, the couple everyone talks about. If only they knew what really went on behind closed doors. My chest burned with a mix of anger and restraint, but I kept my expression neutral, sipping champagne, nodding politely at the small talk. The weight of her contempt pressed down on me, yet I stayed still. I had to, because the night wasn't going to end the way she thought it would. As the evening carried on, my wife grew bolder. She laughed a little too loudly, leaned closer to men she barely knew, brushed her hair back with exaggerated grace as though she were the star of the gala. I caught her glances at me, mocking, daring me to object. But I didn't. I watched, silent, patient, letting her build her own stage. The music swelled, the champagne glasses clinked, and conversations blurred together into a sea of voices. That was when it happened. She reached into her purse with deliberate care, her smile curling like a predator's. And in front of dozens of guests, she slid a manila envelope across the table toward me. "Consider this my gift to you," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's time everyone knew what you really are. Nothing without me." Her words cut through the air sharper than any knife. Conversations halted, heads turned, and suddenly, all eyes were on us. The quartet faltered for a moment before continuing, as if even they were trying to smooth over the scene. I looked at the envelope, then at her face glowing with triumph, expecting me to crumble. Whispers rippled across the room. Some guests chuckled softly, others leaned in, eager to witness the spectacle. She thought she had won. But I didn't flinch. I didn't stutter. I didn't even raise my voice. I let the silence hang, staring at her with calm resolve, feeling every pair of eyes drilling into me. Inside, I could feel the fire rising, but I knew better than to give her the reaction she craved. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and waited, because I knew what was coming next would silence the entire room and change everything they thought they knew about me. The room buzzed with tension, the kind of heavy silence that comes after a sharp slap in public. My wife, Claire, sat across from me. Her lips curved into that victorious smile she wore whenever she believed she had put me in my place. Her crimson gown shimmered under the golden lights, and she lifted her chin as though she were the queen of the gala, the orchestrator of my humiliation. The manila envelope sat between us like a weapon, the divorce papers she had chosen to reveal in front of an audience instead of in the privacy of our home. Around us, whispers spread like wildfire. guests leaning toward one another, their curious eyes flicking between Claire and me, waiting for my reaction. I could see the enjoyment in their expressions. People love drama, especially when it wasn't theirs. I took a slow sip of champagne, my eyes fixed on Claire. Her laughter rang out, false and sharp, designed to draw attention. "What's wrong, Michael? Cat got your tongue?" she teased, her voice carrying across the table. A few people chuckled nervously. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I let the moment stretch, the quiet around me pressing in like the walls of a cage. She thought I was cornered, but I knew better. I had learned long ago that silence unnerves people more than words ever could. My stillness was my armor. Claire leaned back in her chair, satisfied with the spectacle she was orchestrating. She tapped her manicured nails against her champagne flute, her eyes gleaming as she basked in what she thought was victory. "I've carried him for years," she said loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Everything he has, it's because of me. Without me, he'd be invisible. And tonight," she gestured toward the envelope, "we make it official." Laughter scattered across the room, the kind of uneasy chuckles that come when people don't know whether to laugh or stay silent. I could feel the weight of their stares on me, judging, pitying, expecting me to either explode in anger or shrink in shame. I gave them neither. Instead, I straightened my posture, setting my glass down with deliberate calm. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, but my face remained neutral. I remembered every insult Claire had thrown at me in private, every time she belittled my ambitions, every moment she reminded me that I was lucky to have her. And now, she wanted the whole city to see me crumble. She didn't realize she had only set the stage for herself. The gala hall seemed to close in, the chandeliers glittering above like cruel stars, the scent of perfume and expensive wine hanging heavy in the air. Across the room, I noticed the judge himself, a tall, stern man with salt and pepper hair, standing near the bar with his wife, Evelyn. She was elegant, poised, the kind of woman who could silence a room with a single look. Her eyes flicked toward our table, narrowing as she observed Claire's little performance. Evelyn had always been perceptive, and in that moment, I knew she saw through the spectacle, through the charade Claire was trying to create. Claire raised her glass, as though offering a toast, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "To new beginnings," she declared. "To freedom." Her words landed like daggers, and the guests clapped half-heartedly, their faces a mix of amusement and discomfort. I noticed the smirk of a man across the room, someone who had always enjoyed seeing me diminished. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I had no need to fight back with words, not yet. My silence unsettled Claire. I could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes as she searched for a reaction, something to prove to the crowd that she had truly destroyed me. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table, my gaze steady, unflinching. The envelope sat untouched between us, her supposed symbol of victory, but I let it lie there, insignificant. Claire smirked again, trying to recover her dominance. "He can't even defend himself," she announced, her voice sharp, "because there's nothing to defend. He's been a burden all along, and tonight everyone sees it." The room rippled with whispers, some agreeing, others murmuring in discomfort. I let the words wash over me, each insult a reminder of why I had stopped caring what she thought long ago. I kept my breathing steady, my hands calm, my expression unreadable. Claire thought she had orchestrated the perfect downfall, but what she didn't realize was that the higher she raised her voice, the harder she was setting herself up for the fall. The quartet shifted to a softer melody. The clinking of glasses resumed at a distance, but our table remained the center of attention. All eyes were on us, the spectacle unfolding in real time. Claire preened under the attention, her hand brushing over her necklace as though she were preparing for a photograph. She thrived on being the center of drama, the star of her own stage play. And I, the supposed supporting character, sat silently in the wings, waiting. The tension grew unbearable, the kind that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. I could see Evelyn now, moving slowly away from the bar, her eyes locked on Claire, her posture straight, her presence commanding. I said nothing, but a small flicker of something stirred in me. A recognition that this scene wasn't going to play out the way Claire thought it would. Not even close. She had handed me her weapon, but she hadn't realized who else was watching, who else was ready to turn the tables. My silence, my stillness, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And the longer I sat without reacting, the more the balance of power began to shift, though Claire hadn't noticed it yet. She thought she was winning. She thought she had already won. But in truth, the game had only just begun. The murmur of voices around the room swelled, like a tide rolling in, everyone caught between the thrill of scandal and the discomfort of watching something unravel in public. Claire's voice sliced through the noise, sharp and triumphant, like she was savoring every second of her performance. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her glass poised delicately between her fingers. "You see," she said loudly, her gaze sweeping across the nearby tables. "This man wouldn't even know how to hold himself together if it weren't for me. He's been riding my coattails all these years. Without me, he'd fade into nothing." The words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. A few people snickered, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to be seen openly laughing at a spectacle that might yet turn sour. I stayed still, my hands folded, my expression unreadable. Every fiber of me wanted to throw her words back in her face. But I knew better. Anger was fuel for her, and I wasn't going to let her feast on it. Instead, I let her continue, digging herself deeper, revealing more than she intended about her need for control. She was too wrapped up in her own arrogance to notice the subtle shift happening in the room. The judge and his wife had moved closer, their presence looming like a shadow over Claire's performance. I could see Evelyn's eyes, cool and calculating, fixed on Claire. She didn't blink. It was the kind of stare that cut through pretense, a look that demanded truth even when lies filled the air. Claire didn't notice. She was too busy soaking in the attention. "We all know people like him," she said with a laugh. "Men who get dragged along by women far stronger than they are. And tonight," she tapped the envelope with her perfectly manicured nail, "I finally set myself free." The sound of her laugh echoed, forced and brittle, as though she were trying to convince not only the crowd but herself. My chest tightened, but I forced a slow breath, the rhythm steady, my body language controlled. I wasn't going to play her game. Not now, not ever again. Instead, I lifted my glass, taking a slow sip, eyes fixed on her. The kind of gaze that doesn't waver, that unnerves more than shouting ever could. A silence followed, short but sharp, like the moment before a storm. People shifted, waiting for me to finally break, to react, to give Claire the scene she craved. But I remained motionless. Claire's smile faltered for the briefest second. It was subtle, but I saw it, the frustration of an actress whose co-star refused to deliver his lines. She needed my outrage to make her performance complete. My calmness was stealing the spotlight from her. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She hadn't spoken yet, but her presence carried weight. People began to notice her movement, their whispers softening, their attention splitting between Claire's cruel theater and Evelyn's quiet approach. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. I could feel her drawing near, her aura demanding acknowledgement even in silence. Claire leaned forward again, her voice rising, desperate now to hold the crowd. "He's nothing," she declared, her words sharp enough to sting. "I built this life, this reputation, everything you see. It's because of me, and I'm not going to drag around dead weight anymore." Tonight marks the end of his charade. The words stung, but they no longer pierced. I had heard them before, whispered in private arguments, laced with venom in the quiet of our home. But hearing them shouted now, in front of an audience, only made them hollow. It was no longer just about me. It was about her need to prove something to everyone else. And in that, she revealed her weakness. The guests sat frozen, caught between loyalty, curiosity, and the human hunger for drama. Their eyes darted between us, their breaths held as though they didn't want to miss a single word. The music from the quartet faltered, the violinist missing a note before finding the rhythm again. Even they were distracted, their instruments almost drowned by the tension in the air. I placed my glass down gently, the soft clink of crystal against wood loud in the silence. My hands remained steady, my expression unreadable. And yet inside, I could feel a shift, a storm building, though not within me. It was around me, circling closer, as Evelyn reached the edge of the table. Claire still hadn't noticed. She was too absorbed in her own reflection, too intoxicated by her imagined triumph to see the truth looming over her shoulder. Evelyn's gaze flicked to me briefly, a quiet acknowledgement, and in that look, there was something more, something deliberate, as though she had chosen this moment carefully. I didn't move, didn't break the rhythm of my breathing, but my chest tightened with anticipation. Not because I feared what was coming, but because I understood, in that brief glance, that Claire's stage was about to be torn from beneath her feet. The weight of the moment pressed down harder, the air thick with anticipation. Guests leaned forward, their whispers dying into silence, waiting, sensing that something unexpected was about to shatter the script Claire had written for herself. She laughed again, a brittle sound, raising her glass high as though sealing her performance with a final toast. "To me," she said, her eyes glittering. "To freedom, to strength, to finally being rid of the useless man who never deserved me." The room fell utterly silent. For a heartbeat, even the clinking of glasses ceased. The hum of conversation vanished, and the quartet's melody faltered once more. It was the silence of an audience too stunned to react, the kind that makes every breath, every movement louder than it should be. Claire smiled, certain she had won. She didn't see Evelyn standing just behind me now, her presence undeniable, her poise unshaken, her eyes fixed not on me but on Claire. I sat still, my hands folded on the table, my body relaxed, my face calm, as though I had expected this moment all along. Inside, my pulse quickened, not with fear but with the certainty that everything was about to change. And Claire, so confident, so certain of her triumph, had no idea the ground beneath her was about to give way. The silence in the gala hall stretched long enough to make the chandeliers above seem to flicker, though the lights remained steady. Claire's smirk widened, her chin tilted higher as she basked in what she thought was triumph. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with exaggerated grace, as if she had just delivered the closing act of a performance. But before her satisfaction could settle in, Evelyn stepped forward, her heels striking the polished floor with sharp precision. Every step was a punctuation mark, drawing the eyes of every guest in the room. She carried herself like someone who knew she didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. By the time she reached the head of the table, all whispers had died. Even the music stopped as the quartet lowered their bows and stared. Evelyn's face was calm, almost serene, though her eyes held a gleam that promised fire. She rested one manicured hand lightly on the table, not beside me but directly across from Claire. Her voice, when it came, was clear, cutting, and impossible to ignore. "Strange," she said, her tone dripping with measured amusement. "To hear you mock your husband for being useless when you clearly don't know who he really is." A ripple of shock tore through the room. Claire blinked rapidly, her confident smirk faltering, her wine glass trembling just slightly in her hand. She tried to laugh it off, though her laugh sounded forced now, brittle and too loud. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Evelyn straightened, her posture flawless, her poise immaculate. She looked not at Claire but at the crowd, making sure every guest heard her words. "This man," she said, nodding toward me with a slow, deliberate gesture, "isn't the weak, useless shadow you've painted him to be. He is my partner. Together, we now hold half the controlling interest in the foundation you're all here to celebrate tonight." Gasps broke out across the room. Forks clattered against plates. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted forward, needing to see more clearly, needing to confirm they had heard correctly. The very foundation that Claire had mocked me for having no connection to, no influence in, was suddenly being placed in my hands by none other than the judge's wife. Claire's face drained of color, her eyes widening with disbelief. That's not possible," she stammered, her words faltering. "You must be mistaken." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, a smile curling at the edge of her lips, though it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that cut, the kind that stripped away masks. "Mistaken?" she repeated softly, almost with pity. Then she raised her chin, addressing the room again. "I do not make mistakes when it comes to business, nor do I waste my time on people unworthy of their positions. This man has earned his place, his share, his respect. Unlike some, he doesn't need to shout for attention or humiliate others to prove his worth. His presence alone speaks louder than your mockery ever could." The words hit Claire like daggers. She shifted in her chair, her knuckles white around the stem of her glass. For once, she had no script, no rehearsed cruelty, no laugh to lean on. The audience she had fed with ridicule was no longer hers. Their eyes weren't laughing with her anymore. They were condemning her, watching her squirm, seeing through her cruelty for what it was. And me? I sat in silence, my expression calm, my breathing steady, my hand resting lightly on the stem of my glass. I hadn't said a single word. I didn't need to. Evelyn had done more with a few sentences than I could have with hours of shouting. Claire opened her mouth to argue, to deny, but the weight of silence around her pressed her words back down her throat. She looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, to laugh with her, to validate her, to turn the tide back in her favor. But there was no one. Not a single ally stepped forward. Not a single smirk met hers. The guests were either stunned into silence or smirking quietly at her downfall. Her humiliation was complete, and it hadn't required a single word from me. Evelyn raised her glass now, her posture flawless, her eyes never leaving Claire's. "To true strength," she said, her voice ringing clear through the room. "To those who don't need to belittle others to shine. And to new beginnings built on respect and partnership." Slowly, guests lifted their glasses too. One by one, the crystal rang in unison, toasting not Claire's declaration of freedom, but Evelyn's revelation of truth. Claire sat frozen, her glass untouched, her eyes darting from face to face in disbelief, her entire performance dismantled in a single moment. I raised my own glass then, calm, deliberate, holding it high enough for her to see, but not in her honor. I turned slightly, nodding to Evelyn in acknowledgement, my lips curling into the faintest smile. Then I took a sip, slow, unhurried, my eyes never leaving Claire's. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing came. The silence from her was louder than any outburst could have been. She had lost not just her stage but her voice. I leaned back in my chair, setting my glass down with a quiet clink, my hand steady. And in that moment, I understood something deeper than triumph, deeper than revenge. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it sat in silence while the world rearranged itself around the truth. Claire looked smaller now, shrunken, like the weight of her own arrogance had finally crushed her. Her shoulders curled inward, her confidence evaporated. No one was laughing with her anymore. They were laughing at her, though no sound came. It was in their eyes, in their smirks, in the way they leaned toward me instead of her. And in that silence, she understood. She wasn't the star of this evening. She wasn't the queen she believed herself to be. She was the spectacle, the joke, the woman who handed her husband divorce papers thinking it would break him, only to find herself broken instead. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply sat there, calm, unbothered, stronger than I had ever been in her eyes. And for the first time, she saw me clearly, not as her shadow, not as her prop, not as the man she mocked, but as the man who no longer needed her approval, her validation, her cruelty. The hall erupted once more in applause for Evelyn's toast, the sound echoing through the room, a tidal wave of acknowledgement and respect. And as Claire sat silently, her face pale, her glass untouched, I knew she had learned something she would never forget. And in that moment, I realized something too. Silence, when wielded with truth, can be louder than the cruelest laugh, sharper than the harshest words, and stronger than any public humiliation. It was in that silence I finally found peace. And it was in that silence that she finally understood.